Everybody. I like to get started pretty close to right on time, so we'll get started today. My name is Lisa Sawsville. I'm with Vermont Coverts, Woodlands for Wildlife. Many of you are cooperators, so welcome. To those of you that aren't, you can learn more about Vermont Coverts on our website. I'll throw that in the chat box. You all came in muted, and I ask that you keep your mics muted so we aren't distracted by background noise. If you have any questions, go ahead and type them in the chat box, and I'll relay those to Toby at the end, and we'll have a little conversation that we can have regarding your questions. Toby is with the NRCS, and I'm going to let Toby sort of introduce himself and tell us more about NRCS and the programs available to you as landowners. Take it away, Toby.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully I can get this set up. How's that?
That looks good.
Okay, good. All right, well, welcome everybody. I'm Toby Alexander. I'm the state biologist and forester for the NRCS in Vermont. I'm going to be talking about forest and habitat management through NRCS and its programs and conservation practices. It's fairly high level. I've got about 20 minutes of material to go through, and then we can kind of take it from there, what folks want to discuss, and get into topics as well if there's interest. So I'll get started. So people may not know NRCS, and I'll tell you a little bit. We started back in the 30s, started with the Dust Bowl. We started out as a soil erosion service and became the Soil Conservation Service, and then the Natural Resources Conservation Service in 1996 with that Farm Bill. So we are a federal agency within the United States Department of Agriculture, similar to the Forest Service, except that we work primarily with private landowners. We're the lead federal agency working on private lands. A lot of the federal agencies out there work on federal lands. We work primarily on private lands. Our big focus is agricultural producers and forest landowners, and the forest landowner part, that's a big reason I'm here today. So we'll have a lot of material around forest for you all. And we're responsible for implementing Farm Bill conservation programs. And I'll be talking about two in particular that I think will be of most interest to this group today. So NRCS has a wide variety of resource professionals that work within the state and within the agency nationally. We have field offices across the state. We have 10 field offices, and we have a state office that oversees the field offices. And I work out of the state office in Colchester, but I'm actually out of my basement today. And we employ engineers, we employ archaeologists, agronomists, soil conservationists. We have business type folks, the whole mix of types of people that help us with this this conservation assistance that we do with landowners. And all the work is really begins with a conservation plan, and that's what we'll be talking about a little bit more today. And that's a whole process. It's not a real linear process. It kind of bounces around as you have conversations and visits with the landowners and walk the land and see different things and tease out different landowner objectives, come up with different alternatives to fix potential issues out on the land. And then you come up with conservation practices, which we have a whole suite of them within NRCS nationally and within NRCS in Vermont. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that. Just so you know, NRCS is in every state in the nation. So Vermont is similar to other states, but each state has its own priorities set locally. And so we'll be talking about what our priorities are in Vermont's landscape today. So you'll hear me talking about resource concerns quite a bit today. This is what we address through our environmental quality incentive program. And that's one of the Farm Bill conservation programs I'll be talking a little bit about today. And really think of a resource concern as just a fancy word for an environmental problem of some sort. So I'm going to be focusing on what we may see more in the coverts type landowner, but in the bottom left corner, you'll see something that we see less today than in the past in history, but water quality problems associated with agricultural lands, And when we say a water quality resource concern, there's a whole slew of different types of concerns that would be tied to that picture we're seeing in the bottom left-hand corner. We've got issues with potentially sediment and high nutrients getting into the water. We have lack of any kind of aquatic habitat within the water. We have potential elevated water temperatures. All these things add up to numerous water quality resource concerns that we may need to address. We also, of course, I think this group is probably quite aware of the problem with invasive plants. That's one of our common practices that we have for forest and wildlife habitat type landowners. And that's a problem that it's very complicated, and we work through that through our conservation planning process. And we don't just try to take on every and all invasive plant we ever see. We try to be strategic with how we use that practice to address that resource.
Toby, there's a quick request to see if you could talk a little bit louder or maybe a little closer to the mic. You sound a little muffled.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yep. I will try.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, is this any better?
Yes, I think it is. I'm seeing thumbs ups.
Okay, good. So another common resource concern that we have is plant productivity and health. You'll see that in the upper right-hand corner. That just kind of indicates an overstocked forest stand that is not growing that vigorously. And so that's where you may have potentially disease type issues, insect competition, things that would degrade from the productivity and health of that stand. So we have various practices to help with that, including forest stand improvement. In the bottom right-hand corner, just an example of soil erosion. I think everybody can probably recognize soil erosion. This is a gully on a forest skid trail that was potentially closed out properly, or perhaps not. There's major events we're getting now, rain events during the summer. Some of the roads that we're seeing in the past that were in good shape are starting to erode. So this is a concern that we commonly address on forest land as well. And then, of course, inadequate habitat. This group would be very interested in this, I assume. This is a variety of types of issues that you may have, limiting factors to wildlife on the landscape. And we do a lot of our work is focused around early successional habitat management and rare and declining type species habitat management. And I'll talk about a few practices geared towards that in a minute here. So one of the big programs that I'll hit on today is the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, commonly called EQIP. This is our broadest program, I would say, and one of our largest, as well as funding in regard to funding in the state. And it addresses a variety of ag sectors and resource concerns, anything from grazing to cover crops you see there, to headquarters and barnyards, waste storage facilities, irrigation with vegetable operations. It's just runs the gamut, and it includes wildlife habitat and forestry work as well. And I just have a quick picture of those in the bottom center of your screen there, some forest stand improvement. Another common thing is stream crossings. You see in the bottom right-hand corner. That's something that a lot of farm roads are crossing streams, and a lot of times the structures are fail, and we have major erosion events. We help address those and make those more compatible with large flood events as well. So for this group, I really wanted to focus on this part of EQIP that is really geared towards people who are interested in habitat management and forest management. So again, when you think EQIP, think about addressing resource concerns. So these would be major problems that you may have on your property. We have conservation practices that are funded at a pretty high rate, a high percentage of what we anticipate they would cost you to reimburse you for implementing these conservation practices. I'll touch on a bit more in a minute. But I just wanted to hit on a few of these major headings that we may have for forest wildlife habitat management within EQIP. One common and pretty popular practice is forest management plans. We actually offer forest management plans to Vermont landowners. They're similar to a UVA type plan for folks that are enrolled in the use value program, appraisal program. But they have more of a stewardship element as well. So really they're similar to a tree farm plan. They're similar to a stewardship plan. And there's actually a template, a national template of criteria for NRCS plans that jive with tree farm plans as well as stewardship plans. So think of them as a UVA plan with a lot of stewardship elements, including conservation practices to address problems that the forester may see on the land. We focus a lot on rare and declining species habitat. So one of the big things in the Northeast for habitat is early successional habitat. And I'll be talking a little bit more about that in a few minutes here. But other species as well. Think of like wood turtles, species that are uncommon on the landscape and have kind of specialized habitat requirements. We do that type of work as well. We obviously have terrestrial habitat. That's early succession, would be considered upland terrestrial type habitat. We also have aquatic habitat focus, and that would include, doing actual aquatic habitat improvements, such as woody additions potentially, but also anything having to do with stream crossings, where you have a road with a potentially undersized culvert that is actually inhibiting aquatic organism passage. That's a resource concern that we can help address if it's on private property. So there's a variety of things that we do that benefit aquatic and terrestrial habitat. This picture you see here is actually a riparian forest buffer that was planted. So that obviously has both implications for terrestrial habitat, connectivity, as well as just providing that habitat that may not be there along ag lands, as well as that shading of the stream, the elevated stream temperature, and other things that riparian forest buffer can help with water quality as well. Sprinkled through all of our practices, our pollinators, we have specific practices that would really be targeted just for pollinators, but we've actually adjusted a lot of our practice standards and the way we do business when we're doing forestry and habitat management work to benefit pollinators as well, just because they're important, they're critical for ecosystem function, and they're a high priority due to the declines we're seeing out there as well. Some other core plant health and vigor, that was our forest stand improvement example I just gave a minute ago, our invasive plants, and then soil erosion and water quality. And so, remember, EQIP is about conservation practices, and it's addressing these major concerns you may have on the land. So I'm going to step through a few of the major practices. We don't have a ton of practices that we actually implement for forestry and wildlife habitat management work through NRCS in Vermont, but they're commonly used. I'm going to touch on the most commonly used today. So one of the big ones, as I said, was early successional habitat management. Grassland birds actually are a priority in the state, particularly in the Champlain Valley, where we have large agricultural grassland areas. We have various options to address the primary concern, which is the disturbance that we're seeing during the nesting period due to haying. So we have various options available. I can talk a little bit more about that if we have time at the end. There's a delayed second cut, which instead of mowing August 1st, is you're allowed to cut early in mid-May, followed by a delayed second cut that provides similar reproductive success as delayed mowing until August 1st for your first cut. So that's a very interesting option that I can talk a bit more about later on if we have time. Obviously, we're going to prioritize the best grassland bird habitat, which is going to be large fields in high priority areas, which is Champlain Valley and other agricultural areas. Now this option, another early successional, and you see these codes at the top. Every conservation practice has a practice code. 647 is for early successional habitat management. So I'm just including that for consistency so you understand that. But really early successional habitat for shrubland birds, I think this has the best potential across the whole state. There's definitely some high priority areas in the Champlain Valley where you have large areas of shrubland habitat, like old pastures that are starting to grow up. But I think this has a lot of potential across all of Vermont. We all have old fields, old orchards, hill pastures, things like that, where we can manage for this kind of this variety of several stages out there. So we have this example, this picture here, you see where we did some clearing back of some trees, and we left some shrub islands and mowing portions so that we have a lot of complexity out there in the landscape. the shrubland birds such as field sparrow, golden winged warbler, a couple examples here. A lot of those species are in a lot of decline as well across the Northeast. We focus a lot of attention on that type of management for those species. A lot of other benefits to these types of habitats. They tend to have a lot of species with soft mass plants, a lot of shrubs with that fruit and flowers, beneficial pollinators, as well as food source for birds and mammals alike. And we have a lot of different types of managements depending on how the field is set up now, or if it's a forest that's just starting to grow up, or field that's just starting to grow up into forest. We have a variety of different options for that. So this is another one, early successional habitat management, again, young forest. So you see like there's this kind of break between grassland, old field, and then young forest. So these would be in not necessarily mature forest, but more mature forest where you may have pole timber, something like that out there. And we're looking at removing the canopy, creating these patch cuts, as commonly called. And what happens is you get a flush of growth. You get very high stems per acre, which provide really high quality cover, as well as you get a lot of shade intolerant plant species, which are a lot of those beneficial wildlife shrubs and trees that produce, they flower and they produce soft mass. So the other good thing is that these areas are very productive. All the vegetation is near the ground level, so the insects are very available to a lot of different species as well. And then, of course, you've got the browse aspect too. Again, your growth is near the ground, so there's a lot of food available to all sorts of different types of wildlife. We've really designed ours around declining songbird type habitat, but it benefits non-game birds and game birds and all sorts of different species. Forest stand improvement, 666 is another practice that I wanted to touch on today for sure. This is a fairly common practice. You need to have a forest management plan that identifies this activity. I assume most people have forest management plans on the call. But if not, that's important. We want to understand that we're doing the right prescription for that property, and we look to the forester to design a lot of these, what they're prescribing, and we have a variety of different options to help implement these. They're generally kind of pre-commercial, non-commercial type work for the most part. Area-wide thinnings, crop tree release, girdling, forestry for the birds type projects as well. So quite a diversity. But we really feel like we've got an opportunity here. If they're not just about improving productivity of that timber stand, you can really shape that future forest if you do this properly. Keep trees on the landscape that may be lost and crowded out as these forests mature, things like black cherry, that are really beneficial to wildlife, but can be enhanced and maintained and improved on that forest stand with a little work early on. Invasive plants, couple different practices we use for this problem. 314 is brush management, 315 is herbaceous weed treatment. You don't need to remember that, just know that we can help address this problem. A lot of the common problems we see are foresters concerned about getting regeneration, and having a carpet of invasive plants below the forest canopy is a problem for any type of regeneration type cut. So we help with that, and we also help where we have other disturbances type plans. So think about if we're planning to do a forest stand improvement or an early successional young forest cut. If we have invasive plants out there, then we're going to need to do some sort of treatment. If we're taking that canopy off, we're going to be providing a ton of sunlight to those plants, and we don't want to give them a competitive advantage. So that's generally where we'll do this type of work for the most part. It's really a long-term investment and maintenance project for the landowner. We'll help with up to 3 treatments, but that's not going to make them go away forever. So there's always that maintenance in the long run. As you walk your land, you'll need to keep an eye out and continue to control those as you can. Excuse me. Forest trails and landings, 655. Again, for managed forests, this is about addressing these soil erosion and water quality concerns that an eroding skid trail can cause. This can also get into stream crossings as well, as these skid trails meander down to those stream crossings. So typical situation is we have landowners that didn't know they had a problem, or they maybe purchased land where the land maybe had a timber sale and wasn't put to bed properly. So they may have some severe gullying or other problems. Basically, this is not a complex practice. It's about getting the water off the road as efficiently as possible. And we've really designed our practices around the acceptable management practices for forests and parks. So, spacing of the water bars, how they're designed, is really consistent with AMPs. So it's a pretty straightforward practice that can do a lot of good to keep the soil in the forest and out of the streams. Aquatic habitat, we have various practices that benefit that. 391 is riparian forest buffers. Tree planting along streams that don't have buffers is obviously important for all reasons we talked about. There's 395, which is stream habitat improvement and management. And we're just starting to get into doing some stream woody additions, improve aquatic habitat. Not many contractors out there right now, but we see a lot of benefits to brook trout and that type of practice. We're actually adding parts of trees to the streams to provide some complexity, capture sediment, nutrients, detritus, create that whole complex food web, and keeping the aquatic insects fed and giving good cover to the fish as well, and keeping those streams in a nice deep and narrow channel as possible. The other big one in the bottom right corner is that AOP, aquatic organism passage. That's the 396 practice. Really, this is a huge concern across the state. One challenge is that a lot of these mapped AOP problems that are on the landscape are mapped on public lands. We don't have great inventory on private lands, but where we see a good fishery potential and we have these types of structures, there's potential for retrofit or replacement to get those more passable to aquatic organisms. Okay, so shifting gears here a little bit, Conservation Stewardship Program, CSP. Talk a little bit about this program for you. So think of CSP as taking your stewardship to a higher level. This program is called the Green Program, and it was introduced in part to reward people that were good stewards of the land and doing good work out there. There was a complaint with always addressing the worst environmental problems. There was complaints that you're always giving money to the people that have the worst problems, and the people that are doing a good job get nothing. Well, this was an attempt at kind of rectifying some of that. And the Conservation Stewardship Program is to take your existing conservation to a higher level and provide stewardship payments annually for 5 years as you do that. So this is really best suited for those that have addressed a lot of their resource concerns already. So if you've been through EQIP or WIP a few times and you feel like you've addressed quite a bit, this may be a good program for you, because the payment is really based upon how many resource concerns you've already addressed on your property. So for folks that have done a lot of work and have really put a lot of time and effort into making their land better for wildlife and forestry, then this may be a good fit. There's a variety of options, but basically, depending on the number of resource concerns met, there's a formula that provides your stewardship payment annually is at least $1,500 a year. And then on top of that, you have what we're calling enhancements. And they're similar to conservation practices. They're tied to conservation practices. So you're going to see these same practice codes. So I'm just giving just a very few examples of types of enhancements that are available through CSP. Like I said, CSP provides you a payment for continuing your existing stewardship on the land that you've done, but then you also have to do something above and beyond, and that's what these enhancements are. So basically, they're parts of the practice standard that take beyond the minimums of the practice standard. So for these 666 forest improvement enhancements, here's a couple of options of that people have used in the past. So one is crop tree management for mass production. That's similar to the practice we have, but it's specifies a bit more of a release, I would say. oversized release on those trees. And then another one we have is this E6660. Don't get too caught up with the codes, but the title of it is Snags, Den Trees, Coarse Woody Debris for Wildlife Habitat. So depending on what your forest needs, you can add these elements through this enhancement, be it creating snags, dropping trees to improve your coarse woody debris, a variety of different options. So these are just a few that you'll see for forest stand improvement enhancements. Another popular kind of group is planting type practices. So I've given you a couple examples here. We've got tree and shrub planting for wildlife under the 612, which is a tree and shrub establishment practice. We have tree and shrub planting for wildlife food. So it's really geared towards providing that high value food source for wildlife. And that is a common interest of a lot of people that are doing this type of work. There's another one called 391C, that middle one there, and it's just about increasing the buffer size. So if you have an existing buffer, you can increase the width of that through this enhancement. So that involves a lot of tree planting to improve that buffer width for wildlife. So it would be beyond the minimum 35-foot width that is required through the practice standard. And then we have established pollinator habitat through the 420 practice. That's the wildlife habitat planting practice. And that's the enhancement tied to that. And again, the pollinator habitat plantings where you're planting forbs is a really good practice, but it's challenging. And I always tell people that it takes a lot of work, and there's a really important amount of site prep that needs to go into that to try to get these forbs to take hold. And so that site prep really is a season-long, if not a year-long process ahead of time. So just something to keep in mind. So just a little bit about how the process works. For landowners have a lot of questions around this, I assume. So basically reach out to the NRCS field offices and request assistance. That's how you kind of get the ball rolling. The field office staff and partners, we have agreement with the Vermont Fish and Wildlife. They assist us in this type of work. They meet the landowner and determine those objectives and talk about what kind of resource concerns they're seeing, what the landowner has for ideas out there, and inventory the resources out on that property. Then the conservation plan is written and developed with the landowner. It's a joint process, of course. And then that landowner's plan, their project is assessed and ranked compared to all others in the state. And that's how we determine who gets funded, okay? And so depending on the assessment, again, it kind of depends what type of landowner and what state the land is out there, which program is a better fit. So if you still have a lot of resource concerns to address on the property, then EQIP may be a better fit. But if you've already done quite a bit of work, then CSP may be a better fit. So next, the field office creates a contract from the conservation plan to be signed by the landowner. So the landowner gets a contract and the money is obligated that for their project to their project over however long period of time their project is designed for. It could be 3 to 5 years potentially. And with that, you'll see in the upper right-hand corner just a quick little example of what the conservation plan map may look like. So this was the map that goes along with the plan, identifying kind of the extent of what's going to be done, which practices are going to be done where, so that you have that record. And then the schedule of operations to follow through the life of that contract. So you have this table showing you when stuff was scheduled, how much was to be done and where by the land unit. So pretty straightforward. And then what happens is NRCS or the partners will work with the landowner to give them a site plan for their practice. So we have what we call job sheets or implementation requirements, which is basically the site plan for your practice. Now, obviously, we have these practice data to refer back to how these practices should be designed, but each site is different. And one site may have some very important trees nearby that we want to maintain, and that would be included in that site plan through the job sheet or implementation requirements. And so the NRCS or partners from Fish and Wildlife would work with the landowner and the contractor to make sure these important things were maintained. And then what happens next is we lay out those practices on the site and how they're to be done. And then once the work is completed, it can be done for the most part by the landowner or a contractor. Some of our practices, we require certain certifications like invasive plant control. But generally, as long as it meets our standards, we can move forward and we can certify that the practice is complete, and then we can process the payment for the landowner. So, just to kind of wrap it up a little bit, so you can request assistance through any of the NRCS field offices. You can just Google NRCS in Vermont and contact us, and you'll see the whole list of different field offices across the state. You can just pick the one closest to you. It may be, it's really based around a service area, which you can call the nearby one, and if you're not in that service area, they'll direct you to the right person to call. So for EQIP, there's typically batching deadlines for applications. Usually the first one is in the fall, early winter, and the next one is into the spring typically. We kind of just missed the EQIP application timelines. There is a potential for another EQIP offering through this EQIP CIC, a new program. It's unclear if that's going to actually happen this year or not. But you can request assistance anytime, get in the pipeline, get yourself lined up with NRCS. So a few upcoming deadlines I just want to let people know about, though. We have a CSP application deadline of April 23rd. So if you're one of those people that seem like this might be a good fit for you, there is an application deadline coming up for that. And then the other thing is our EQIP Forest Management Plan deadline coming up is May 14th. In the past, we had this offered through the year, and we're moving to a new application time period, and it's going to always be mid-May. And so this is the start of that, coming to this new application time frame. So just be aware of that. If you're interested in the forest management plan for next spring, if it's for UVA update, you'll need to get that in soon for May 14th, okay? So I think that's a quick overview, Lisa, and I can take any questions now.
That sounds great, Toby. There's a couple questions in the chat box, and of course, I always have questions. So the first one is, can a homeowners association with shared common land work with NRCS to create a management plan?
Potentially. It can be a little complicated if there's multiple landowners. We do have an eligibility process, and that would be something that the homeowners association would have to work through our farm service agency, which is our sister agency located in our USDA service centers with NRCS to determine eligibility for those. Kind of depends.
That's usually the answer when we have the coverage training. When people ask questions, it depends.
Yeah.
All right. So they could contact their local NRCS office and see if they would qualify in some way.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Is there a minimum acreage required for a forest management plan when working through NRCS? So like I know with current use, basically 27 or more acres with a 2-acre house site. What is if there is a minimum for NRCS?
I don't know if there's actually a minimum. I think the lower end of the size limit for the payment scenarios we have is 10 acres. So it's definitely can be 10 acres, down to that size, which is below the UVA requirements for sure. So it can at least be down to 10 acres. If there's, unique situations lower than that, then I guess I would have you reach out to the field office and check in with them.
And what about for implementing some of the practices? Like I have an old field behind the house that's probably about 5 or 6 acres. Can I qualify and get some shrub help or pollinator help? Is it worth it? Invasives. I have buckthorn and I have lots of this stuff back there. And I'm in the Champlain Valley, so does that help?
It would actually, like I said, we do have priority areas somewhat for some of these species based on, various either statewide or regional plans. We have Bird Conservation Region 13, which is in the Champlain Valley, which includes a lot of the grassland birds and shrubland birds. So if you have an old field in the Champlain Valley, I think it would be worth it. I mean, it depends on the current state of your field. So if it's not very diverse and it's all mowed, the whole 5 acres, during the breeding season, and there's no structure, no shrubs in that field. And it's just a sea of invasives around it. It probably could use a lot of work actually. If you already have a lot of complexity out there, a good mix of shrub islands, a mix of native invasives. I'm going to say invasives are not the total end of the world from a habitat perspective. If there's nothing else available, if it's mixed in with natives, it can be suitable. It kind of depends, Lisa, again, but it sounds like it could be worth it. And the funding, the rates, we have published rates on our EQIP webpage. You can look all that stuff up, but brush hogging is upwards of close to $100 an acre, I think. So it can add up. It can be worthwhile. And if you have that interest in wildlife, you might get some ideas from us or Not Fish and Wildlife that you maybe didn't have before about how to manage that the best.
Sounds good. All right, I got a couple more questions here. Jeff has 40 acres of pasture, but only 20 acres is of the quality to be hayed. Can CSP help to improve the hay quality for the other 20 acres, like cover crop planting and new grass planting?
It potentially can. That typically, and I'm glad you asked this question, because for the conservation practices that we talked about, straight conservation practices, not the enhancements, through EQIP, they're upwards of 75% or more of the cost to implement those practices. Through CSP, those same practices are about 10% of what we consider they cost. So that means that if you have a major practice that needs to be installed, it's probably a good idea to take a peek at EQIP, because that's going to be your best reimbursement for that. And if we're talking about reseeding, that generally sounds more like conservation practices than an enhancement to me. But situations, there's usually some more details. So if he wants to follow up with me after to ask some more questions about that, that may make the most sense.
Okay, great. And we'll put your email in the chat box when we're done. Perfect. So the next one, will EQIP pay for a landowner for the work that they do themselves, or do they have to hire a contractor?
So it sort of depends again. And the best example of where typically a contractor needs to be hired is through invasive plant control if herbicides are going to be used. There's some pretty strict requirements around herbicide use and recommendations to the Vermont Agency of Ag, Food and Markets, the state agency. They oversee pesticide use. So we require that whoever applies herbicides for invasive plant control has certifications from Vermont Agency of Agriculture. We have had some landowners go through that certification process, very few, I would say. So in general, we don't require it to be a contractor, but generally contractors do invasive plant control work. As far as tree cutting type practices, we've had plenty of landowners do their own tree cutting type practices. If they're doing forest trail work with an excavator or something, that's generally a contractor, I would say. Or if it's installing any type of stream crossing, it's really involving heavy equipment, so that's generally a contractor. For the most part, landowners can do a lot of the work themselves, but it depends on the practice and the situation sometimes as well.
Okay, great. Mary wants to know about preparing for her first NRCS visit. She's already filed the applications for EQIP. And so what should she do to prepare for this visit?
Well, to just have an idea of maybe take a peek at your forest plan if you do have a forest plan. That's usually one of our first steps with landowners is gathering information. We call it inventory resources. So we really try to gather as much information as possible. And so a forest management plan can be a wealth of information. And some landowners have a hard time locating their forest management plan. So having that available and getting it to NRCS ahead of time would be excellent, actually. We can.
Yeah, I've done that.
Oh, perfect.
They had that.
Perfect. I mean, because what that will tell us is we can look at and look at the forest stands and see if any have real obvious potential for some of our practices, like the forest stand improvement or maybe some young forest type of work. we can look at stands that are younger and maybe near some old homesteads or something like that. These would be areas we want to walk through, just look for invasive plants.
Mhm.
And maybe the forester has identified some of these practices. If this is, you know, a CAP plan from NRCS, they may have identified some practices already for us to look at. So that's one thing. Any other information you have out there that you've done or you've had other consultants out there doing? I mean, one thing of interest for us, of course, is rare declining species and habitats. So if there's been any type of sightings of rare and uncommon species out there that we might need to know about, these are all things that we need to be aware of. Knowing about where wetlands are, where streams are, having a really good knowledge of your land and all these sensitive resources is important, particularly if you have invasive plants. If we do invasive plant control where herbicides are used, we need to know where all the sensitive resources are. That would include wetlands and streams. It would include water bodies, it would include wells, wellheads, all that sort of thing. So just having a really good knowledge of your land and where things are would be really important.
Okay, should I come up with suggestions for things that are besides what's on the forestry plan?
You can, absolutely. I mean, one thing that, you know, is do your homework. Like if you have some really strong interest in a certain type of wildlife or something, like
Okay.
do some homework on that, because we do go out with some landowners that really don't have a really good vision of what they really want to see out of their property. And so that may take a little bit longer time to tease that out. So for landowners that have a pretty good idea of interests they have and things they'd like to focus on, it can make things easier. I understand though that as we work with a landowner, we often open their eyes a bit, maybe things they haven't thought about or seen from their property. I mean, we're gonna look at what the attributes of your property are. So if you have, you know, Balmer, beautiful northern hardwood, you know, beautiful growing condition site, and the trees are in excellent condition, we're never gonna prescribe a young forest cut on that. It's gonna be, that should be something that's grown for the economic value of that stand. And so we just want to make good choices and help you make good choices for your property. So it's really just having a good knowledge of your property is a big help.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So there was also a follow-up question that she had is, do any of the programs help with hayfield drainage?
Generally, no, not anymore. You know, years and years ago, we did drainage. And now we have a variety of programs in place to restore wetlands. So it's more along the other side. You know, there are some situations where if it's causing some other environmental problems, you know, there could be some potential for diverting water around the hayfield. But it's really, I can't really say that yes or no that easily. It kind of depends a lot on this one, I would say.
Great, thanks. Alrighty, we have Ron who has White River Floodplain Conservation Easement with the Vermont River Conservancy. And they have a 50-foot riparian easement with the White River Partnership, which plants native tree species. The river, however, is bordered with Japanese knotweed. Are there any complementary mitigation programs, practices, or assistances available from NRCS for working with this particular issue?
We have done knotweed control work. I'd say that's one, you know, depending on the extent of the knotweed, and the White River, I'm guessing it's not great. I'm sure it's pretty bad. Our goal is generally not eradication, and for a lot of species in a lot of places, our goal is not eradication because it's just not, it's not realistic, I would say. A lot of times in those riparian settings, the goal may be only to give the trees a head start to get above the Japanese knotweed. You know, even with doing up to 3 control treatments like we can do, there's still going to be knotweed out there. It's still going to start to come back, and you can keep after it, but it's an annual thing that you'd have to do. So for us, a lot of cases, it's trying to get those woody plants established. So kind of hitting that stuff pretty hard to get those trees established, and then you know, as our practices, all of them are, you know, the idea is we help the landowner get a handle on these situations, but in the long run, it's back on the landowner to handle that problem. So that's kind of how, in general, we handle the knotweed stuff when we're trying to establish trees, I would say.
Thanks, Toby.
Jeff was wondering, does the landowner labor count towards the cost share? So if I'm doing the apple tree release or whatever it is, does my labor count towards that cost share?
Sure. So it's really not a reimbursement, it's a payment. So we have set rates that are based on what we think it costs to do that activity. So in some cases, people may do pretty well on a project, or they may end up paying more than they thought. So if a landowner wants to do some of that work themselves and they're capable, that's fine. They're going to get paid the same either way.
Okay,
Does that make
great.
sense? Yeah, so it's not, you don't have to submit bills at the end and we reimburse a certain amount. It's, you get what's in your contract. It's a set rate. Everybody gets that same rate, just to be fair.
And only if the practice is verified as being done and complete, is that how the payment works?
Yeah, exactly. So that certification process, I said certify in that last slide. Basically,
Okay.
We go out when a landowner calls and says, okay, the practice is done, we go out and look at it. And we assure that it was done per the job sheet and our practice standards, so properly. And then we look at the extent that was completed. And so if we planned and laid out, say this, and this happens fairly commonly, say 20 acres of forest stand improvement, and only 15 acres are completed and work was done on 15 acres, that's all that's going to get paid. And that can be frustrating to some folks. That there may be some misunderstanding, but we're going to pay for the footprint of work that was completed.
Okay, great. Peter's wondering if you could give a little more detail on the ranking process, like what influences a better ranking, and if one is denied, can they reapply?
Yes, you can reapply. Yep. So the process has changed a little bit. I've been around over 20 years now, and when I first started years ago, it was all the bulk of the points for the ranking were based around state questions, and our state questions were developed through our state technical committee, our subcommittee, which includes folks from Ancient Natural Resources, Coverts in the past, Vermont Woodlands Association, Audubon, DNC, so a variety of partners on that. And we built the ranking around practices that we could do based on Vermont's landscape. Our priorities were set based on the Wildlife Action Plan, and then state and regional plans, particularly bird conservation plans that we have across the region. There's good information about that. And so what we've tried to prioritize is where you have the potential for from high quality habitat. So from the habitat side, it's high quality habitat that's prioritized. So if you had a grassland bird field, let's say, all things being equal, you had a grassland bird field in the Champlain Valley that was 20 acres in size compared to a 20-acre field in, say, Washington, it would be prioritized in the Champlain Valley because that area of the state has been prioritized in numerous plans. So some things you can't really change, but some things you can. So if you have numerous fields, and you only want to manage, we talked about those shrubland birds, and that's a target species group that I think anybody across Vermont could manage for the most part. And you have maybe 10 acres of available habitat that would make a very strong project, right? Because the bigger patch size for habitat value is going to be greater. So if you have a larger project, generally that's going to provide better habitat function and value. And say the landowner only wants to manage 2 acres of that. That's gonna not rank as high as somebody that's willing to manage that entire 10-acre field. So I hate to say it again, but it sort of depends. But it's really based around a variety of things. So the level of improvement. So if you have, say, a riparian area that has a few invasives in it, and the whole project is just controlling invasive plants, a few invasive plants in that buffer, compared to planting a new buffer on an agricultural field that has all sorts of water quality impairments, that second project is probably going to rank higher because it has a lot more functions and values associated with that. And then we have, of course, have the statewide plans, priority areas that are in there as well. So those are all the things that we kind of control. And the other part that I haven't had a lot of dealings with yet, but we have a new business tool that has a lot of background information that is captured based on where they are in the landscape, soils information, the longevity of the practice, and some other things. So for us, I'm trying to focus on what we can control, and that's really been consistent for the last 10 years or so. I would say we've had this similar type of ranking that has seemed to work pretty well for us.
Great. Can you tell a little bit more about the stream crossing aspect? Is it to fix stream crossings, like if I'm going to do a logging job, or is it a stream crossing that I'm trying to improve? How is that work?
So yeah, for us, it's not really an ease of access type thing. It's, again, we're focusing on those resource concerns. So our typical stream crossing in an agricultural setting is they may have a culvert that's blown out, or it's getting eroded around. So we've got soil erosion and water quality issues, and maybe nutrients too from livestock waste potentially. So addressing something like that, turning it from a undersized culvert into a low water ford crossing where they can just move through really easily and not have those constrictions on the channel that cause all sorts of problems. In a forest setting, it's going to be typically associated with an eroding skid trail a lot of times. So you may have a mucked up skid trail that has gullying and issues around the crossing. We're really not about trying to help landowners close out after a timber sale or anything like that. That's on the landowner and the logger, their agreement to take care of those issues. Our concern and where we typically work are those landowners that have had, they either purchased the property or something happened on the property that's outside their control. Those are the types of problems that we'll address with the stream crossing practice. And undersized culverts are a problem, and we definitely, in general, just for everybody on the call, we definitely try to dissuade the use of any culverts in the forest if possible, just because they are a maintenance problem. They're easily plugged. You're not always out in your forest maintaining those things. And time and time again, our worst problems we see in the forest are where we have culverts that were put in the forest and not really maintained. So
I'm going to assume the answer to Jeff's question, which is, what if I have a bridge that is deteriorating? Could I use EQIP to replace it? I'm thinking that sounds like a big no.
Generally not.
Okay.
Not. Yeah.
All right.
Unless it's causing some other kind of environmental problem. Yeah.
Okay. Mary's wondering if you could elaborate, or if you knew the priorities that were selected for the Upper Valley.
Upper Valley. Well, there's definitely a lot of aquatic and riparian type habitat work going on over there. I didn't really talk about some other parts of NRCS, but there are other programs available, and one that seems to consistently be over in the Connecticut River Valley is our RCPP, which is Regional Conservation Partnership Program. It's a partner-driven program where they come up with the priorities and that sort of thing. So we've had numerous RCPPs that are focused on riparian habitat, aquatic habitat in the Connecticut River Valley. So that would be probably one of the big things I would say over there.
All righty. Well, that looks like it for the questions. Is there anything else you think is important that you'd like to share with the landowners on the call? And
sure. Yeah, I've got a few things. How about, I guess I'm all about resources for landowners. So I think I'd like to share a few things from our tech guide. I'm trying to think how best to do that. Let me see here. I'm going to scoot, whoops. So I jumped ahead a little bit. I just want to make sure we cover this. So we have a field office technical guide, and there's a field office technical guide major website that accesses all technical guides in the nation. And there's a drop down list and you can pick Vermont. For us and for this group, I wanted to highlight section 1 of our technical guide. And am I able to share links and such after the presentation, Lisa, with this group?
Sure. If you send it to
Okay.
me, I'll send a follow-up to everybody I can
Okay.
share the links with them.
That may be easiest. And then I can be specific about what I want to show them. But this is just a few examples of basically things we've gathered over the years. And it's not just forestry and wildlife related technical items. We have a lot of agronomic and engineering and soils and all sorts of technical information that landowners may be interested in. And that's what I will share with Lisa. I'll get specific to kind of get you a few of interest, but here's just a few of some of the technical references that are available, not just to our field office staff. I mean, that's what it's intended for, but it's for the public as well. And so take advantage of this information. I've done a lot of tracking some of this stuff down over the years, so I want to make sure people know about it and get good access to this stuff. So just a few examples. We have a lot of great resources from Xerces Society for those people interested in pollinator conservation. That Farming for Bees document, that's just one of many in the upper right-hand corner. And like I said, we have the technical reference PDF document, and it's searchable. So basically, if you have a subject area of interest that you want to look up, like crop trees, for people that are interested in doing more crop trees, we've got some great technical items around crop tree management that we've dug up over the years. You can search just based on keyword. A few others, we have some local things like this management considerations I started to touch on for grassland birds in Northeast Haylands and pasturelands. UVM has an over 20-year study going on of grassland birds in the Champlain Valley. They're the ones that came up with this idea for delayed second cut, which provides the same productivity for females and young grassland birds as delay mowing the field to August 1st. So it's really groundbreaking work. They've developed a management insight, we call it. It's like a 10 or 12 page document there. You can look up all sorts of information about deferred grazing and paddocks for people that are grazers to manage for grass birds. You know, we've got great resources from Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department, Stream Crossing Handbook. It gives you some ideas about kind of issues with stream crossings and how to put them in or not. And we've got some information that's, you know, was designed for our conservation planners, but upper left-hand corner, another example of this Vermont Biology Technical Note. We've created some technical notes over the years around different subjects. I've got a decent one for pollinators I think people might be interested in as well. This one's vernal pools in conservation planning, and it has some kind of little snippets and pictures of egg masses and species you should be looking for. It can kind of help you identify if you might have a vernal pool or vernal pool habitat out on your property. So for Mary, who was thinking about what should I do ahead of time, this might be something. You know, we would not want to create a young forest cut right next to the vernal pool, right? Because we want to maintain canopy cover and provide good woody cover for salamanders and wood frogs and all those species that use those. So that's just a quick snippet I've got, and there's some other great stuff too. This Wildlife Habitat Management Institute leaflets, and this wild turkey one just shows you what they look like. But there's another really good one that I'm definitely going to send to Lisa a link for. That is the nesting structures, and it's like a 60-page document, and it includes all sorts of dimensions of bird houses and nesting structure, platform nesting structures for ducks. It has, you know, ways to do predator guards, all sorts of different ideas for that. So it's a really kind of fun landowner document as well. So that's the technical resources I'm going to send out after, so you have that reference. But just take a look if you're, I mean, whatever your interest is, I think we probably have something in there for you.
Excellent. Well, we're right at 1 o'clock. Toby, I want to thank you so much for joining us over this lunch hour today. I'd like to thank everybody else that joined us as well. Hope you found some good information. It's a great way, the NRCS programs, to be active on your land and do active management for our natural resources and our wildlife. So take advantage of it. Call your NRCS office. You can have Fish and Wildlife come walk and help you, and they all help with the paperwork, which is kind of the icky part. And and let's get some stuff going on the land.
All right. Thank you,
Thanks,
Toby.
Lisa.
Thanks, Lisa.
Yep.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.